March 12th, 1993. The Gulf of Mexico, the coast of Florida. The barometer at the weather station in Cape San Blas is falling so fast that the duty meteorologist checks the instrument twice, thinking it's broken. It isn't broken. The atmosphere over North America is about to do something meteorologists have never seen before. That morning, millions of people along the East Coast are living ordinary lives. Children are heading to school in Florida, where the air temperature is 25 degrees Celsius. Fishermen are heading out to sea, with no idea they're sailing toward waves the height of a 3-story building. In Alabama, farmers are checking their equipment before spring planting. None of them yet know that in less than 24 hours, the weather will turn their states into a federal disaster zone. Forecasters have already been tracking 2 systems for several days. Cold Arctic air is descending from Canada. Warm, moist air is rising from the Gulf of Mexico. On their own, these currents aren't dangerous, but the computer models at the National Weather Service are showing something strange. The systems aren't just meeting. They're beginning to rotate around a common center, like 2 dancers picking up speed. One forecaster will later say the numbers on the screen looked unreal, as if the program were malfunctioning. It isn't a malfunction. A phenomenon is being born that will later be called a bomb cyclone, a storm whose pressure drops so rapidly that in intensity it rivals a hurricane. Except this storm won't be confined to one state's coastline. Its diameter will exceed 2,000 kilometers, from Cuba to Canada, a size large enough for a single system to simultaneously spawn tornadoes in Florida, an ice storm in the Appalachians, and a blizzard in New England. The National Weather Service issues an emergency warning. The wording is unusually blunt for an official document. Forecasters write that this is a storm unlike anything modern American history has recorded. Governors in several states declare states of emergency before the sky over their territory has even begun to darken. But many residents simply don't have time to react. The forecast came quickly, but the storm itself is moving even faster. In Florida's coastal towns, people are used to hurricanes that arrive in summer and are known about days in advance. But this is March, a month nobody associates with disasters of this scale. That underestimation will become one of the reasons the death toll ends up so high. By the evening of March 13th, conditions change abruptly. In some parts of Florida, the air temperature drops by almost 20 degrees within a few hours. This creates ideal conditions for tornadoes to form directly inside the cyclone, a rare and extremely dangerous phenomenon, because standard tornado warning systems are built for isolated storm cells, not for a hurricane-scale system of this magnitude. The first blow lands on Broward County, Florida. A series of tornadoes tears through residential areas around 4 in the morning, while most people are asleep. Houses are ripped from their foundations. Witnesses will later describe the same sound, a low hum turning into a roar, as if a freight train were passing nearby. Except this train isn't running on rails, it's tearing the roofs off houses. At the same time, a storm surge nearly 4 meters high forms along Florida's west coast.
God.
The water rises so fast that people who were peacefully asleep in their seaside homes an hour earlier wake up to find water already at the edge of their bed. In Taylor County, 8 people die, most of them drowning in their own homes before they understood what was happening. The storm then moves north, and its behavior changes again. Instead of weakening, as most cyclones do after moving over land, the system keeps gaining strength. The atmospheric pressure at the center of the cyclone drops to a level comparable to a Category 3 hurricane. Forecasters call this an atypical intensification and admit the models hadn't predicted such force. It's at this point that it becomes clear the disaster is far from over. What began as a powerful storm in Florida is turning into a system capable of striking simultaneously across territory, stretching from Cuba to Canada. In the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee, something begins that residents of the southern states almost never see: snowdrift several meters deep. In the town of Mount Mitchell, the highest point in the eastern United States, snow accumulation reaches around 150 centimeters. Roads become impassable within hours. Thousands of drivers find themselves stranded right on the highways, among them families with children who had simply been out running errands on an ordinary Saturday. In Georgia, snow and ice bring down power lines across the entire region. More than 10 million people across several states lose electricity. Hospitals switch to backup generators. In some rural areas, people will be left without heat or light for up to 2 weeks. In the north, in the Appalachian region, something happens that forecasters will later call one of the most unusual episodes in the history of weather observation. Wind speed at the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire is recorded at 335 kilometers per hour, one of the highest readings ever recorded by a ground-based weather instrument on the planet. By this point, the storm no longer looks like a single cyclone. It looks like a battlefront stretched across half the continent.
That's an anomaly.
Emergency services begin failing one after another. Phone lines are overloaded. Emergency responders can't keep up with the calls. Several states declare martial law, and for the first time since major natural disasters of the past, the National Guard is brought in to evacuate entire towns.
Step, ma'am. It's slippery.
But the real turning point comes out at sea. Off the coast of Florida, waves reach heights of more than 10 meters. Ocean buoys record a wave over 12 meters high, one of the highest ever measured in the region. Several fishing vessels vanish without a trace, crews included. The Coast Guard will later say conditions during these hours were comparable to conditions in the open Atlantic during the most severe 19th century storms, known to us only through the accounts of surviving sailors. Among dozens of tragedies, certain stories stand out. Stories of people who in the final moment made the difference between life and death. In one coastal town in Florida, the local sheriff personally went door to door along the shoreline in the middle of the night, knocking on every house, even though an official evacuation order hadn't yet been issued. His decision saved the lives of several dozen people just half an hour before the water rose above the height of a person. In the mountains of North Carolina, rescue teams on snowmobiles spent several days pulling stranded people off the highways, moving almost blind in zero visibility conditions. One rescuer later recalled finding cars buried so deep in snow that they were indistinguishable from ordinary snowdrifts, and only a stray glint of metal under his flashlight gave away that there were living people inside. When the storm finally weakens and moves off toward Canada, the scale of the destruction only becomes clear days later. More than 300 people died across 13 states. Tens of millions of people lost power at various points. Financial damage exceeded $6 billion, a figure comparable to the damage from a major hurricane, even though, technically, this wasn't a hurricane at all, but an extratropical cyclone. For comparison, the area covered by this single storm exceeds the combined territory of several European countries. Snow fell even in northern Florida and in Cuba, regions where snowfall happens once or twice a decade at most. This storm permanently changed the approach to weather forecasting in the United States. It was after this storm that weather services began seriously investing in models capable of predicting systems of this scale days in advance rather than hours. It was after this storm that stricter evacuation protocols for winter storms emerged, storms that had previously been seen as less dangerous than summer hurricanes. And yet decades later, many of these lessons are being forgotten again. Every winter, forecasters warn of potentially powerful cyclones, and every winter, part of the population reacts the same way Florida's residents did in March of 1993, with disbelief, born from the fact that the disaster simply doesn't fit their picture of how the world works. The storm of the century wasn't a fluke of nature. It was a reminder that the line between an ordinary day and an event studied for decades is sometimes measured not in weeks of preparation, but in just a few hours of an underestimated warning.